Everything you've been told about surviving those bone-chilling New England winters is a lie. The kind of lie that has been passed down through generations, like some sacred truths that you need massive fireplaces, stacked with endless cords of hardwood or fancy insulation that costs a fortune just to keep your teeth from chattering through the night. But what if I told you that back in 1947, right after the world had torn itself apart in the biggest war humanity had ever seen, a regular guy named Robert McNamara, a 34-year-old carpenter from the quiet town of Rutland in Vermont, figured out a way to build a home that stayed a cozy 70 degrees inside, while the mercury outside plummeted to a brutal -15, creating this insane 55-degree difference that had his neighbors scratching their heads and wondering if he'd made a pact with the devil himself. And he did it all with a leftover military Quonset hut that cost him just $300 in an ancient stone basement that had been sitting forgotten on his family's land since the 1890s when the old farmhouse burned down, leaving behind these thick, rugged walls that his father used to talk about how they stayed cool in the sweltering summers and somehow held on to warmth when the snow piled up higher than a man's head. But Robert, fresh off his service in World War II, where he had seen enough cold trenches and makeshift shelters to last a lifetime, he saw something in that old hole in the ground that nobody else did, a secret potential for turning scrap metal and century-old stones into a fortress against the elements that would make modern architects green with envy today. And as he stood there in the spring of '47, staring at that crumbling foundation with his calloused hands on his hips and a determined glint in his eye that his wife, Helen later said, reminded her of the day he proposed. He knew this was just about building a house, but about proving that smarts and sweat could outsmart Mother Nature herself in ways that sounded too good to be true. Yet here we are, decades later, still talking about it because it worked better than anyone could have imagined. And the mystery deepens when you realize that Robert was some fancy engineer with blueprints from a university, but a self-taught veteran who de-welded tanks during the war and now wanted a fresh start for his young family, including his 2 little daughters, who deserved better than shivering through another Vermont freeze. So he rolled up his sleeves and started planning this hybrid beast of a home that combined the curved steel ribs of a hut, those semi-cylindrical wonders the Navy had cranked out by the thousands for barracks on Pacific Islands, with the natural thermal magic of that stone basement, which acted like a giant battery soaking up heat during the day and releasing it slowly through the night. A concept so ahead of its time that even his brother Thomas laughed it off. At first, during a beer-fueled chat at the local tavern, where the seller of the hut quizzed Robert 3 times if he was sure about this crazy idea, and the neighbors whispered that he'd gone soft in the head from the war, shaking their heads as they watched him haul in those steel sections on a beat-up surplus truck. But Robert just smiled, quietly, because he understood something they did about how earth-sheltered designs had been used for centuries in places like Europe, where folks burrowed into hillsides to escape the cold. And he was about to adapt that ancient wisdom to post-war America in a way that would shock the valley, making his home not just livable but downright comfortable without burning through wood like it was going out of style. And as the ground thawed in April and he began the backbreaking work of clearing out decades of debris and rotten timbers from that basement, reinforcing the walls with fresh mortar and adding sturdy beams to support what was coming next, you couldn't help but wonder what hidden challenge he was about to uncover deep in that earth that could derail the whole dream before it even took shape, leaving us hanging on the edge of what might have been a total disaster or the birth of a legend. As Robert McNamara knelt there in the muddy pit of that century-old stone basement in Rutland, Vermont, back in the thawing days of spring 1947, with the scent of damp earth filling his nostrils and the distant calls of returning birds mocking the silence of his solitary labor, he uncovered something unexpected beneath the layers of rotted wood and accumulated soil that had turned the place into a forgotten network of natural cracks in the stone walls that seeped cool groundwater like veins in some ancient beast, which at first seemed like a curse that could flood his dreams of a warm haven, but which he cleverly turned into an asset. By channeling it away with simple gravel drains, he learned to rig up during his wartime engineering stints. And this discovery only fueled his resolve to integrate the Quonset hut seamlessly over this foundation, creating a home that was half buried, like those old European earth lodges he'd read about in a dog-eared library book during his army downtime, where the ground itself acted as a blanket against the howling winds that whipped through Vermont's valleys every winter. And over the next few weeks, with occasional help from his brother Thomas, who finally came around after seeing Robert's sketches on yellowed paper that detailed how the curved steel would arc protectively over the stone like a metal cocoon, they spent long evenings after their day jobs cleaning and repointing the mortar in those thick walls that were nearly 2 feet wide in spots, built by skilled masons from a bygone era who knew a thing or two about durability. And Robert added support beams across the ceiling, not just for strength, but to distribute the weight of the hut above, ensuring that this hybrid structure would buckle under snow loads that could reach several feet in a single storm. And by June, when the Quonset sections arrived clanging on that old truck, he was ready to assemble them. Bolting the corrugated steel ribs together one by one, following adapted military manuals that assumed a flat, concrete pad butt which he modified with custom metal brackets, he welded himself in a borrowed shop, drilling carefully into the ancient stone to anchor everything without causing a collapse that could have buried him alive. A risky dance that had him sweating bullets under the summer sun as neighbors drove by slowly in their Model T, as gawking at what they called his tin can castle. And once the shell was up, looking like some futuristic pod plopped atop the earth, Robert dug the basement floor down another 2 feet to create 8-foot ceilings that made the space feel less like a cave and more like a proper living area, exposing more of that constant 50-degree earth temperature below that would help regulate the home year-round without any fancy gadgets. And for the heart of it all, he installed a used cast-iron wood stove right in the basement center, positioning it so its heat would radiate through the stone walls and rise naturally to the upper Quonset level where the family would sleep. A setup so efficient that it required only a fraction of the wood his neighbors burned in their drafty frame houses. And to seal the deal against the cold, he layered scavenged insulation like old wool army blankets and fiberglass batting stuffed between the steel and inner walls. Even crumpling newspapers and cardboard for extra barriers that folks laughed at as makeshift but which trapped heat like a thermos, turning the whole thing into a thermal powerhouse that defied the skepticism swirling around town, where his wife Helen initially worried about living in what she feared would be a dark, damp hole, but who started to believe when she felt the steady warmth during test fires in the fall. And as October rolled in and they moved their modest belongings into this 24-foot-wide marvel that cost less than a new car at the time, with windows punched into the Quonset ends for light and a quiet that absorbed outside noise like a sponge, the air inside already felt different, promising a revolution in how people could live affordably and comfortably in harsh climates. But little did they know that the real trial by fire, or rather by ice, was brewing on the horizon with a blizzard that would test every bolt and stone in ways that could either validate Robert's vision or shatter it into frozen ruins, leaving us breathless to see if this underdog invention would hold. With the first flakes of that fateful 1947 winter beginning to dust the hills around Rutland, Vermont, Robert McNamara and his family settled into their unconventional Quonset home over the stone basement, where the air inside hummed with a gentle warmth from the cast-iron stove that seemed almost magical in its efficiency, holding steady at 68 degrees, even as the outside world dipped into single digits during those crisp December nights. And while neighbors across the valley stoked their fires relentlessly, hauling in armloads of wood that disappeared into smoke faster than they could chop more, Robert's setup sipped fuel like a fine whiskey, thanks to the stone walls absorbing every bit of heat and releasing it slowly through the hours when the wind howled like a banshee trying to claw its way in but finding no purchase against the earth-sheltered design that buffered everything. And Helen, who had packed their daughter's woolens expecting the worst, found herself peeling off layers in surprise as the home stayed bright and inviting with sunlight streaming through the upper windows during the day, turning what could have been a gloomy bunker into a cozy retreat that muffled the outside chaos. But the true shocker came in January 1948, when a monster blizzard slammed the region with sub-zero temperatures for 5 straight days and winds that ripped roofs off barns and froze livestock in their tracks, a storm so vicious that it made headlines in the Rutland Herald as the worst in decades. And yet, inside Robert's creation, the thermometer never budged below 70, allowing his family to bake bread and read stories by lamplight as if it were a mild spring evening, while friends down the road dealt with ice forming on their inner walls and pipes bursting in the cold. A contrast so stark that word spread like wildfire after the thaw, drawing curious visitors who knocked on the curved steel door, asking to feel the warmth for themselves, only to leave baffled because Robert S.'s explanations about thermal mass and passive earth heating sounded like sorcery to ears tuned to traditional log cabins or frame houses that leaked heat like sieves. And even though he shared his secrets freely, pointing out how the basement's constant ground temperature acted as a natural moderator and how the Quonset S-shape shed snow without strain, most folks nodded politely but stuck to their old ways, to set in their skepticism to try something that challenged everything they thought they knew about building in the North, except for a few, like his brother Thomas, who built a similar setup for his workshop, and a local farmer named Dutch Steinberg, who adapted the idea for a heated barn that saved his animals that next winter without a single log burned. But the deeper mystery lingers why Robert's genius faded into obscurity, never making it into architecture, books, or post-war housing guides, despite influencing modern earth-sheltered homes and passive solar designs that echo his principles today. And perhaps it's because he was just a humble carpenter without connections. Content to live quietly in that home which still stands modified in Rutland, owned by a retired teacher who heats it with minimal propane. A testament to enduring innovation born from necessity after the war. And as we reflect on this story, it's clear that Robert McNamara didn't even just build a house, but unlocked a forgotten truth about harmonizing with nature rather than fighting it, proving that sometimes the simplest ideas scraped from history's scraps can outlast the grandest plans, leaving us to ponder what other lost wisdom from the past could revolutionize our lives if we dared to dig it up. And hey, if this tale of grit and cleverness got you thinking about your own home or just fired up your love for hidden history, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories like this that uncover the real heroes of the past. And drop a comment below telling me what wild invention from history you'd want to see next, because your ideas keep this channel alive and kicking. Word count, 6.